Hello, and welcome back to One Conversation, the podcast where we believe one conversation can change a life. Today, we're going to be having a unique conversation. We are going to be talking about the top 5 things that we each have learned since working in this field. And in preparing for this, we were kind of wondering, okay, are we all going to have the same thing? Like, is there really that many different things that we've all learned? And the answer is yes. We can definitely relate across a lot of these things, but there's also some unique things. We'll have a little bit of fun with it. We'll take some of them, of course, with the subject matter we work in. We will be taking this subject pretty deep, but we will also keep it light as well with some of the things that we're talking about. So let's jump into it. Let's hear the 5 things that we have each learned in our time working in the domestic violence and sexual assault and child abuse fields.
I am just so excited for this episode. I can go ahead and kind of start us off. So, the first thing I've learned working in this field is how important it is to use supportive language. And so, it's not always so easy to be mindful of the language that we use, but it is so important and critical for us to make sure that we are using supportive language, right? Especially when it comes to responding to disclosures, even in conversations with others. Maybe someone's talking about a story of sexual assault or domestic violence, right? It is so critical and important for us to use supportive language, right? So, yeah, that sounds like something really difficult that they experienced. Or if someone says something that is not appropriate, like, I wonder what they were wearing, right? Or I wonder if it was because of them drinking so much that sexual assault happened, right? It's so important for us to use that supportive language and be like, there's no excuse for that type of abuse, right? Or if they were drinking, that is the exact reason why that person should have not had, any type of sexual intercourse with them. And so, with that being said, very often what we see is survivors of abuse feeling shame, right? Or feeling really bad about what has happened and kind of, blaming themselves for it. And one thing that Brene Brown really does a good job talking about, and for those that don't know who Brene Brown is, she's this amazing author, has a lot of amazing books, so definitely check her out. But what she really talks about is how guilt is adaptive and helpful, but feeling ashamed can be an intensely painful feeling or experience. And so it's really important to know that when someone feels ashamed, they may believe that they are flawed, and therefore even unworthy of love and belonging. And because of that shame, we may believe that we've experienced, done, or failed to do makes us unworthy of connection, right? Which can play a really critical role in our life, right? Can really impact us in such a negative way. And so, again, us using supportive language can really help survivors not feel that shame, right? Reminding them that what has happened to them is not their fault, right? If they for some reason feel guilty of something, even though we always say there's no excuse for abuse, right? Letting them know that feeling guilty is okay, but feeling ashamed is not okay, right? And so, again, I'm just highlighting this because it's very common for victims of abuse to feel shame. And we don't want them to feel like that when they have experienced something so traumatic already, right? And so, again, just making sure that we're using that supportive language. Also, if someone is disclosing, making sure that the language that we're using is empowering them, is supporting them, right? Is not making them feel, alone, ashamed, or making them feel like they are to blame, right? And so, again, just be mindful of the language that you use. You can really make a difference when it comes to someone coming forward and disclosing. I've had situations where, someone has disclosed to me, and not even in my professional work life, they have just disclosed to me because of a conversation we're having about sexual assault, right? Or domestic violence. And because I'm using supportive language, like there's no excuse for abuse, right? Or that is not okay, right? That does not sound like respect, and that person deserves to be respected. I've had people that I don't even know really disclose to me or talk to me about their experience because they feel like I've kind of opened up that door, right? Of making them feel safe or making them feel like I have some type of understanding in regards to that type of abuse.
That's so important. I'm so happy you bring that up because what a common go to, I think, for so many people to hear about some kind of an experience with an assault, right, or an unhealthy relationship or violence. And immediately it's like our culture really reinforces victim blaming. And that's something we're going to spend a whole episode talking about. Probably within the next few episodes, so definitely keep an eye out for that. But yeah, victim blaming, it's so pervasive. It's really kind of where people's minds tend to go to. It's like, well, what were you doing there? Why did you drink that much? Why were you dressed like that? Which are all basic human freedoms we all have, right? To kind of
Mhm.
wear what we want and drink if we're of age. And so, yeah, I love that you bring that up first and foremost. And so, to kind of carry on, I will share my first bit of information I've took away from working in this field, that boundaries are so important. And I know we just did an entire episode on boundaries. If you have not listened into that, I encourage you to go back and check that out and get a really full conversation on boundaries and how to incorporate them in your life. But yeah, I, for so long, I think, was just in such kind of a frame of mind with my work that it's just go, 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 go. And, being in this kind of a field where it's so mentally draining sometimes, right? We all know that firsthand, how if we're not doing self care, if we're not setting boundaries for ourselves, it's so easy to kind of feel very in over your head, right? We're dealing with things that are triggering for us or re-traumatizing for us or just really difficult to hear in general, right? Not even based on our experiences. And so at first, I feel like I was just trying to kind of take everything on. So any presentation, any kids group, any chance to get into the community, and just felt after a while that I had really, like, I was just constantly kind of what Bree mentioned in our episode about boundaries, like pouring from this very empty cup. And it started to hit me like, yeah, I want to do, really great prevention. I want to speak to everybody. I want to help everybody, but I can't do that if I'm spread so thin that I can't be there mentally 100%, right? Or very, very present in that moment to really be connected with what I'm doing if I'm, yeah, exhausted, or if I'm just in a space where I'm kind of not okay, right? Based on the things I've been talking about or the things I'm dealing with. And so, yeah, it's something I'm not perfect at it. I'm still practicing boundaries, especially within work as well as my entire rest of my personal life. But yeah, I really had to focus on making it a priority to set boundaries and to really just slow down and make sure not only I'm setting them, but I'm maintaining these boundaries for myself as well.
Yeah, that's so true. That I think the work-life boundaries and just making sure that we can get so passionate about this work, and so making sure that you're taking care of yourself while
Yeah.
still serving out your passion. That's so important to have that balance.
Especially virtually too, right? I feel like now it's
Yes.
like because we're
Yeah.
virtual, meetings are just like back to back to back to back because they're expecting that we can just log off and log back in. But it's like, I want maybe a minute to get a glass of water and like go to the bathroom and eat lunch, right? So, yeah. So I was really happy to be able to first and foremost bring that one up today. I feel like there's probably a lot of people out there, not just within our field, right, that could probably take that
Hmm.
away, right? Hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. My first takeaway, or something that I've learned, experienced while working in this field, when I actually interviewed for this job, I remember them saying something about there being a reservation in our community, and I didn't really think too much of it because I didn't know how much it was really going to influence my job and my work there. And then my first couple days that I was on the job, I remember my supervisor at the time, she was like, "Well, have you ever been out to the reservation? Have you ever driven by it?" And I was like, "I'm completely unfamiliar. I don't even know where it is." And
Right.
so we went on a drive, and I was able to see just how close it actually was physically to our office. It's about 2.5 miles from our office. And as I was going through the work, I realized just how much we do interact with that community. And so I had to learn that you can't, just because you have a role of, educating people or helping people with sexual assault and domestic violence, that doesn't mean that you can waltz into any room that you may or may not be invited in and to just like talk about it like
Yeah.
you're talking about how to make a grilled cheese or something like that. Like
Right.
there is a level of relationship building and trust that has to be built in a community like that. um, you know the county that I work in, Alpine County, it is so incredibly small. Everybody knows everybody. just to give our listeners a feel on how small it is the least populated county in all of California. The last census, so we'll be waiting on the 2020 census to see if this has changed. But in 2010, there was 1,200 people in the entire county.
Wow.
So very, very
That's
small.
so tiny. Oh my gosh.
And some people will say that that number includes some dogs. So
I like it
very
more.
like everybody knows everybody. You know, if you're new in the community, people know you're new in the community. And so
Right.
I came in, like I was saying, you know, we get so passionate about, oh my gosh, I'm so excited to have this role. I want to do this. I want to do this. And I, you know, myself walking in this room as a privileged white person, talking about domestic violence and sexual assault to this room full of Native American people is like, I I couldn't just do that. You know, there had to be
Right.
relationship building. I had to go to the luncheons. I had to really meet people and have conversations and not come to them as like, I am Brietta. I am an expert in sexual assault. Let's talk about sexual assault. I had to come to it as my name's Brianna. This is a little bit about me. Tell me a little bit about you. Let's connect on a human level. Let's get to know each other. Let's see where our commonalities are just on that human level. And I've shared on this podcast before that I am a survivor of abuse, and that's something that I share openly. And sometimes I'll say that you know I'm coming to this work as a survivor, and it's not as this like expert who read it in a book. Like, I'm talking to you about this, and I know that because I come from a place of privilege, we have completely different experiences on this. But that's again one of those commonalities where it's like we have all these differences, but here's where we can connect and here's where we have this conversation. And now that I've been in this office for about 4.5 years, I'm very protective of making sure that anyone new in the county also builds that relationship. You know, when we have a new staff member who is working in the Tahoe office, maybe comes down, wants to like learn about Alpine, you know, which we love. We love to share our community and all of its uniqueness. But if someone's coming down and expecting that they're going to waltz into a presentation with me, I'm very protective over that because I know that that takes work to
Yeah.
build that relationship and to really let the community know that like, hey, I'm not just here like 8 to 5 because someone's paying me and then I'm going to go home and be like a completely different person. Like, this is who I am, this is what
Right.
I'm sharing with you, and I want to have us both learn from this experience. You know, it's not just me or us coming in as you better listen to us because we know what we're talking about because we come from this organization. Like, in some
Right.
ways, they might know more than me in some subjects. And so leaving the space for those conversations to happen, that was definitely something that I didn't really anticipate coming in, you know, interview and day one and day two of the job. I didn't anticipate that I was really going to grow that much, even just as a human being and having those relational conversations. But I'm
Right.
so thankful for that experience. And I'm also so anxious to when we can get back to that and going to
Mhm.
the luncheons again and all of that, because it's kind of going to start that process over again. There's been
Yeah.
over a year of time that I haven't really been able to connect with people on that casual level of like, hey, how's it going? You know, that just doesn't happen like it should over Zoom or over phone calls. It's different. And so I think some of that will actually have to start over. So I'll probably be learning that over again when we can all meet in person.
Absolutely. Bree, thank you so much for, I think, highlighting, how important it is to be culturally responsive. And then also with that being said, the importance of also addressing and highlighting, the privilege that we all have, because in some way we all have some type of privilege over somebody else. And so I think that's something that's so critical and important. And I've worked in Alpine for a short amount of time, and I definitely learned that you have to build trust to kind of build those relationships and build that rapport, right? And so, thank you so much for sharing that with us. And so, the second thing I've learned working in this field is how common sexual abuse, child abuse, and domestic violence is, right? I think when you are a survivor of abuse, and once, when you have experienced that abuse, in that moment, you always feel alone, right? At least for me. I definitely felt alone. during those experiences, I felt like I had no one to talk to. I just felt isolated, right? And it's so important to know that you are not alone, right? And it is common to feel alone as a victim or survivor of abuse. And so it's really important for us to not feel alone, to kind of break that taboo of talking about it, right? One thing that we always often say is violence thrives in silence. And so, again, it's so important to kind of dig deep, search for our inner voice and speak up about what has happened to us, right? Not for others, but really for ourselves. That way, we're able to connect with someone, get the support and the help that you need. So you're not just dealing with what you have experienced, but healing from it, right? Because there's such a big difference. And so for me, I think it was a life changing experience when I took our CIT training. And so, for those who are not so familiar with CIT, it's a crisis intervention training. It's about an 80-hour training that we provide through Live Violence Free, completely free. And, in that training, we address so many different topics, right? We
Yeah.
address child abuse, obviously sexual abuse, domestic violence, teen dating violence, human trafficking. We talk about different complex topics. And with that being said, when I started taking that training 6 years ago, I clearly remember feeling like I just had an epiphany, right? And just to
Hmm.
say the least, I also felt like my feelings were validated for once without me even telling my story, without me even talking about what I had experienced, and the types of abuse I had experienced. I felt so validated, just so validated to hear what that facilitator was saying, which was what child abuse looks like, some of the red flags, what you feel in a situation like that, how a child feels. And I just felt like, oh my God, like, no wonder I felt like that as a kid. No wonder I felt like something was wrong, right?
Yeah.
But there are so many times that we don't self identify, right? It's not like we're like, oh, I've experienced this type of abuse as a child, right? Or, as a
Yeah.
child to be like, I'm experiencing child abuse or child sexual abuse, right?
Right.
Um, but really going through that training really helped me kind of open up the door of healing, because at that time in my life I was dealing with so much and I thought, it's in the past, I'll leave it in the past, I've moved on, I'm older, I'm better, I'm more wise, I'm more outspoken, but not really dealing with what I had experienced because I never really identified what I had experienced, right? I
Yeah.
knew that my childhood was not healthy. I knew I did not like, how I felt in my own home, feeling unsafe and uncomfortable many times. And so, for me, it was just such a validating experience for me to just hear them say, there's no excuse for abuse. That is not okay. That is not what a child should be growing up in. That's not what a safe environment is. And so, again, it was just such a life changing experience. And I learned through that training that it is so common to experience sexual abuse, child abuse, and domestic violence, right? And it really kind of helped me feel not alone. Like I'm not the only one that is experiencing this. I also felt validated. And then I also felt like, you know, I could possibly connect with someone, I shouldn't feel ashamed of what I have experienced. So, and to me, even though I kind of wrote this down as like the second thing I've learned, this is I think, one of the best experiences for me, even just working with Live Violence Free and attending that training. It has been a life changing experience. And I really mean that, where it has really shaped me into becoming who I want to become. It has really helped me address a lot of things I did not want to address and that I kind of was either in denial about or just wanted to just forget about. And so, lesson learned. You
Yeah.
cannot do that. But yes, again, it is more common than you think. So definitely, if you're experiencing any type of abuse, speak up, find your inner voice, and connect with someone once you are comfortable and feel safe to do so.
I think that CIT class for all of us, I feel like we've all had one of those like aha moments sitting in that CIT
Yes.
class. And it might have looked different for all of us, but I feel like, yeah, they're, again, if any listeners out there maybe are like hearing about this and you're curious or you're interested, it's incredible. I mean, yes, it's an undertaking. Yes, we said 80 hours and it's 80 hours. They're about 3 hour
It's
long.
split up over what, a couple months. It's
Yes.
not like two straight work weeks
we
or
keep
anything
you
like that.
we keep
Yeah.
you locked down for like 12-hour sessions. No. But yes, they're 3 hour classes. I mean, it really is like it's almost like a college 101 on all of these topics. And when I say
Yeah.
101, I feel like that dilutes it a little bit because it's not a 101. Like we really dive into everything, not just talking about assault and what it is, but we break down the different types of perpetrators and the different types of individuals who assault and the motivations. Like it's
Mhm.
so comprehensive. But I really do appreciate that whole thought, JC, because it really just speaks to, right, you having your aha moment, being validated, and just hearing dialogue and language that allowed you to really understand what you had been through and really process that. I think that's the most important part, not only about our CIT class, but with this podcast, with everything we do, right? Because it really comes
Hmm.
down, I think, for a lot of people, it's just that language. And Brianna spoke, this is probably 2 episodes ago, but you said, we were talking about your experience being a survivor, and you said at the time I didn't really think of it that way because I had an idea in my head of what an assault was. Maybe it's violent or
Hmm.
loud, and there's damage and there's injury, and that's not what happened to me. And it took me a long time. And when you said that, it allowed me to kind of process in that same way, right? And there's been things that like I've been working on in my own experiences that is, of course, now at this point I'm looking and I'm like, okay, this needs to be addressed. Clearly, something happened, but it was just such an interesting aha moment hearing you say that. Like, I didn't have those words at that time. Like, I felt disconnected from what had happened, and it took me a while. And I was like,
Mhm.
wow, that's exactly where I am with a situation that I had been through. Right. And so, again, that's why we're so stoked just to be able to come here. And even though some days it's hard for us, some days we're sharing personal stuff, we're really hoping listeners out there maybe, yeah, kind of have that aha moment for themselves, maybe can
Right.
get to a point where you're able to process. But that
Hmm.
being said, I think we also kind of just talked about how there's a lot of misconceptions with relationships, right? With how we don't want to talk about them, with how we kind of think we maybe are alone or isolated in this, but no, it's very common. And so, my second thing that I'll share that I learned is that there is so many misconceptions on abusive relationships, for assault. And I will be so transparent. Before coming into this field, of course, these things mattered to me in certain ways, but did I have like the education, knowledge, and all of this kind of like resource and dialogue with me to kind of like carry out these missions or participate in this? No, I didn't have that, right? So before I was in this field, there was a lot of misconceptions that I really didn't recognize at the time, or misconceptions, or maybe when things were said on the news, or maybe when those kind of victim blaming questions were asked. Well, why was she wearing that, or why did she go to that party, or why would she drink that much and hang out with those guys? I wasn't like, yeah, but in my head I was kind of like, interesting question, right? Like at the time, I think I was just so ingrained with everything else going on in society, with all of the ways that we have our common misconceptions about these things, that I was just kind of roped into it, right? It took me going through CIT, it took me really learning a lot about these dynamics, why it happens, what the motivation is, for me to finally like pull those cultural lenses back and understand like, wow, these are all just things that we are totally maybe like blowing out of proportion, or maybe we're placing blame where we shouldn't be, or maybe we're just like not honoring people that are going through this and why, right? And so I think for everybody just to understand that, we're not saying you have to like agree with us or like what we're saying, but even just to start identifying that maybe you're one of those people right now that does watch the news and hear those stories, or you hear about assaults that have happened, and maybe, yeah, maybe you're kind of on that level where it's like, well, yeah, why were they there? Or well, why are you going to ruin that guy's life? This just seems silly, right? So maybe, again, maybe you're not going to like walk away being like, wow, they've totally changed my mind, but maybe you could say, are some of these misconceptions, or are some of these things we're saying about this helpful? And hey, if maybe more people at least just kind of question things like that, we've done a great job here. So all I can say
Yes.
is just remind yourself of that. And this is something, again, we're so deeply ingrained in this work. I mean, we are going to, I don't even know how many hours of training we get a year on all of the subject matter. It's extensive and constant. So,
Hmm.
do we know what we're talking about when we're saying there's misconceptions? We do. It's not just like a personal opinion base over here. It comes from years and hours and hours and hours of this knowledge. And so I think that's one of the biggest things I can also kind of share with our listeners today. Just keep that in mind. There's a lot of misconceptions out there.
Yeah, one phrase that came to mind while you were talking, Lisa, is you don't know what you don't know. So I
Mm,
think if you're living in the world and you're just being fed everything that the news is feeding you and you're taking everything as, that's the way that it is. And I think now, especially with social media, there's a much better discourse around um, being more aware of how we're using our language in reporting stories and how we're talking about survivors and all of that. But
right.
all the misconceptions still exist. They're still out there. They still reach people. And so going through trainings like CIT or being exposed to content like maybe listening to this podcast or educating yourself through reading a book about sexual assault or domestic violence, or it's just something like that, exposing yourself to that content, you're now learning what you didn't know before,
Yeah,
and you're able to be better and to have more knowledge around those things. So that was just something that came up when you were talking about that.
snaps to that.
My second one is just meeting people where they're at. And that phrase has always like grammatically bugged me. I don't, just as every time I say it, I hate like ending it in at for some reason,
It's a
but
weird
it's
statement.
really like it is, but I don't know how else to say it. So meeting people where
Yeah.
they're at. Another thing that I learned, onboarding onto this job was how much we really are a one-stop shop for
Hmm.
survivors, for people experiencing abuse and violence. We
Yeah,
have domestic violence programs, we have sexual assault programs, we have housing, we have legal, we have parent visitation services. Like there's so much, and you would kind of think from the outside looking in, like, okay, someone experiencing violence, if they're identifying they're experiencing violence, they come to live violence free, they access everything they need, give them a couple months, they're good to go, they're well on their way, we're done, we're good, smooth, easy process. I don't think it's ever happened like that with
yeah.
any of my clients that I've worked with.
I was like, that sounds so
Um,
nice. Yeah, that's a great story. Yeah.
Right. We would love for it to happen like that, but it doesn't, because we can't expect everyone to come to our services and to be ready to access everything that we have to offer. Even though it's there for them, they
Right.
have to be ready. It's just like leaving that abusive relationship. There's nothing we can do, even if we say, we have this rent program available, we have this therapy program that you can get in the next day or something like that. Even if we do that for them, it still has to be on them for when they're ready and where they are, what they're going through. And so that was a learning curve for me too, because you know, I want everyone who deserves or can access these services to access these services, but it's on them where they are. There's so many factors that play into someone being ready to really leave that relationship, to change their life. It really is a big transformation of your life if you have maybe grown up in child abuse and then you're realizing that that's not what you deserve, and we have services for you, but that's a major life change from what you grew up with, and so that's going to take time. That's not going to be something that's just like, oh, I'm going to go to therapy for 3 months, we're good to go, my life is better.
Mhm.
Like it's everyone is on their own process, and
Yeah.
we just have to remember that the person coming to us for services is who is in charge. We can present them with this platter of what we have to offer. They get to pick up what they're ready to pick up, and the rest we'll keep on that platter. We'll keep offering that platter, but it is completely up to them for what they are ready to take.
I love that platter metaphor. That's like a perfect
Yeah.
way. of yeah, really just highlighting that. And it also reminds me of like being at my mom's house when she's just constantly with like a whole tray of food, just like, you want something?
Yes.
And you're like, no, I'm good. She's like, it's here though. So it's like,
Yeah.
we're kind of like
Yes.
my
Feel
mom in
free to
that
grab
way.
some when you're ready. Yeah. hmm No, I love that, Bree. And I think that's something that's so critical and important and something we've learned as advocates, right? And I think just as a supportive person, we learn that, you can't try to get someone somewhere where they are not ready to get yet.
Mhm.
It's really important to kind of meet them, like you mentioned, where they're at and just let them know that we're here to support them. Every situation is so unique, right? Every single survivor of abuse has different barriers. And so we treat it as that, we treat their situation as a unique situation and we're just there to support them. So thank you so
Yeah.
much for highlighting that. So the third thing I've learned working in the field is how important and crucial prevention education and awareness on abuse is. And, like I mentioned earlier, taking CIT was just such a life changing, situation and experience for me. And with that being said, it's something that I've learned also through the prevention work that I've done, right? I always think back and, just in regards to what Lisa, Bree and I do, in our communities where we go and do prevention education in every single school. We talk about body safety, we talk about relationships, we talk about trusting adults, right? And I just think back to when I was in school and I'm like, I did not receive any of that. Like, oh my God, that would have literally changed my life, right? I would have responded in such a different way to what I had experienced in my childhood if I would have had that information. And so I always just think to myself, like, God, prevention education is so important. And not just the prevention education, but, awareness around a lot of the topics that we talk about, right? Because it can really begin those important conversations. And that's why we came up with this podcast, One Conversation, right? Because it can literally change someone's life. And so, again, there are many victims of abuse that experience abuse and don't even realize it, right? Or don't even identify it as abuse. And so it's so important to have these conversations, even though sometimes it may be uncomfortable, especially if you're not used to having these conversations. But especially when it comes to child sexual abuse, right? We know that communication is key to preventing child sexual abuse. And I've had many conversations with many different parents and different, outlets in my life, whether it's in my personal or work life. And I've had a lot of parents that are hesitant to talk to their child about child sexual abuse, right? And I explained to them that you're not going to be like, oh, let's talk about child sexual abuse to your like 6 year old, right? You are going to use obviously language that is appropriate for them and that they'll understand. But it's so important to just open up, a dialogue in regards to it, right? And have that conversation. And sometimes you'll see adults that are hesitant to do that because they think that it may not be the appropriate time or they're too young, but they're never too young to have these conversations, right? One thing that we've learned is that typically those people that hurt children often tell the child to keep it a secret, right?
Hmm.
Or they may even threaten to hurt the child or will make them believe it's their fault. And
Yeah.
so it's super important to have these conversations and kind of do some of that preventative work, right? And kind of reassure them that if something ever happens, they should speak up and you're going to be there to support them, and to listen to them and to believe them, right? And it's something that often we see also with domestic violence victims and sexual abuse victims as well, right? When they are experiencing abuse, a lot of times the abuser is using threats as well, right? Or making them feel like it is their fault. And so, again, it's so important that we do prevention education and that we raise awareness around abuse. And with that being said, you know, just I just want to quickly highlight intergenerational cycle because it's something that is real, right? And so someone that has grown up seeing abuse may think that abuse is normal, may think, that may be their norm. And so what
Yeah.
happens is they pass that on as well, right? So now if they've witnessed domestic violence or have experienced child abuse, right, and they get into a relationship or they have children, that's something that they're going to possibly mimic and pass on as well. And it just never ends. And so it's so important, again, to kind of raise that awareness and have those conversations. And yes, it's awkward. And yes, sometimes you're like, I don't really want to have this conversation. It's difficult for me, but it can really make a difference. And, just really quickly, personally, something that I realized is that sexual violence is an intergenerational cycle in my family, right? Without even realizing it. And so, I've mentioned before that I don't know if I've shared it on the podcast, but when I disclosed my sexual abuse, I disclosed it to my mom, and her reaction kind of discouraged me to ever speak up about it again. It was kind of normalized or just kind of made seem like that's not something you talk about, right? Because you want to make sure people see you as a lady, and so for me at that age, it was so confusing. Like I
Yeah.
felt like I did something wrong, right? And I felt like I couldn't say anything about it. I felt like I couldn't even tell my dad, right? Because that was mostly her concern, him finding out and wanting to do something or, respond
Mm.
to someone hurting me. And so I kept it to myself, right? And I lived in constant fear because that person was a family member and they were around all the time, which was obviously very triggering.
Sure.
And, I verbally was not expressing the pain and hurt that I felt, but my behavior was definitely doing that for me. My behavior, went from being a kid that had great grades to and always getting awards and always just exceeding because I've always been highly competitive in anything I've ever done. And I went from being that girl to a girl that was struggling, a girl that could not sleep at night and would fall asleep in class, and a girl that did not want to sleep alone. It was just a lot, and I did not know how to deal with it, as a child and then teenager. But as an adult, I started having these conversations with my mom because I realized that I needed to have that conversation to really heal from what had happened and to really address, like, why did you respond in that way? Because I have a
Mm.
daughter now and I can never imagine myself making her feel that alone, right? Or even invisible because that's how I felt. And she explained to me what she had experienced, and then I find out like what, other people in my family had experienced. And I was in just disbelief and shock, and it allowed me to better connect with my mom. Obviously, I will never really understand her reaction and response, but it allows me to feel connected to her and at least kind of come from a place of openness, like, okay, I can kind of see why you would normalize this, right? Or why you would not react in a different way, because this was also a norm that you experienced growing up. And so literally having these conversations have changed my life and in my own family's life. Like we always talk about now safety and even having like get-togethers with family. I'm all about making sure that we're supervising the children, that we are being mindful that there are adults and children in the same place, making sure that the environment is healthy and comfortable for all. And it has taken years, but we finally have gotten to that place, and it's all because we have had these conversations and have raised awareness even within our small circle, right? And so when I say awareness, it's not always just to the community and to strangers. I'm talking about your inner circle, right?
Yeah.
Which can be big
Hmm.
and can really be life changing, and it has been. And that's why when people ask me like, what drives you, or why do you do this difficult work, and I'm like, because it has changed my life completely, and I
Yeah.
know it can change
Yep.
others, and it's not easy, but it's definitely worth it.
That's like sad and just beautiful story though. I just love hearing that ultimately the best thing that could have happened was you all having conversations, because you kind of being armored up with that information and walking in could like recognize, right? Like if something wasn't exactly healthy or wasn't exactly, or maybe being normalized when this action or this behavior like should not be normalized. And so I love hearing that you bringing those conversations, which were probably the first time a lot of your family members maybe had heard a lot of the information, right? And had an
Mhm.
opportunity to
Yeah.
discuss that with somebody, right? That was open and non-judgmental and able to really deliver that information to them in a way where they could receive that. I think it's such a beautiful kind of ending to that story. And I want to go back to you saying, man, if I just had this information when I was a kid, or if I just had these classes,
Yes.
the amount of times I have heard that in these 5 years, if I had a quarter for every single person that told me, like including myself, like, man, if I had this when I was younger, it would have changed my life. If I had a quarter for every time someone said that, I'd be retired on my yacht right now because it's
We could
been,
all be retired with you off of
oh,
those quarters.
my whole family would have Teslas, like
Having a
brand
great
new
time.
Teslas for my whole family. Like
Yeah.
honestly, we would be filthy rich because I've just heard it and heard it and heard it. And even guys thinking about my age, I'm gonna be 33 this year. But in my age, and I feel like in this weird middle, I'm like very adult, but not quite very adult yet. I think at my age, because I grew up in Pennsylvania, I grew up in a small town, went to a really, really nice school, a very high rated high school, technically, right? Especially that part of the country. But we had nothing close to any of these conversations. Like sex ed was it, and sex ed was like, oh, really didn't teach us much of anything besides
Get
just
me out of
like
here.
anatomical body
Mhm.
language and things like that, but like nothing on the process of relationships or, healthy behavior. We just didn't get that, And so, yeah, I think about all the times I have tripped and stumbled and just like awkwardly pursued, right? Like treading into these relationships and situations that, like, oh, if I only knew this stuff, I would not have bothered to keep treading into this choppy water, right? And so, yeah, I just had to bring that up. I think everybody I've spoken to is always like, wow, you guys teach what classes? Like, that's incredible.
Right.
And if you think that, hey, again, kind of what we're saying, right? We have that power within our inner circle. We have the power to, even if we're not like educators, but maybe we did take time to really thoroughly learn something. You listen to one of our podcasts, you're watching TED Talks, you're really diving in, you're on some of these websites that are giving you such great resources. Of course, you could take that back to your family. Of course, you could have those conversations with your friends. And yeah, we
Hmm.
know they're not easy. We're like the queens of we do this all the time, and some days it's easy and some days it's really not. So we get that.
Yeah.
Um, but is it worth it? Absolutely, right? Because really you could be creating part of that, like, oh wow, I wish more people knew this, or wow, I wish I knew this. Well, it's like, well, hey, you could be doing something like that for someone else, right? You could be giving them that little gem of information. And so again, JC, thank you though for just being so vulnerable and sharing all of that. And so I'm going to kind of like circle back a little bit because my next thing that I've learned, we've been kind of touching on this, is that we can't save anyone. And I know we just brought that up again, right? People have to be in the right place. We could offer that little buffet tray, but it's like at your complete, like whatever you want to take at whatever time you want to take this, it's completely up to you, right? It's your choice. And so I really think for me as well, I'm just very much a person. I've always been the kind of person that's just there for my friends, that's there for others. I don't care what's going on for me. Part of my like, I had to learn boundaries, part of my like first thing, right? I would always, no matter what, just try to jump in and like help somebody. So if someone was going through something, like I just want to be there. I don't care if I'm at zero, like if I could just sit with you, like what can I do, right? And so I think
Mhm.
coming into this field and being really personally attached to a lot of this and in my own way, right, where I'm still doing my own work and figuring out where I am in my survivorship, right, or my victimization of certain things, I just was so passionate. I just would hear people's experiences and like my first go to, right, was just like, God, I just want to save you. But immediately, like, I knew with our training, like, that's not my approach and I can't do that. And it
Mhm.
was so challenging at first because I did, like, especially with some kids, like, I just wanted to, like, swoop them up and, like, superhero
Yes.
fly them away, right? Like, you really have that feeling. And it's, it's so important that I reminded myself and kind of switch that language. It's not like, me not literally removing them from the situation and like a superhero quality isn't me helping them. I'm still helping them and I'm helping them a lot more because if I'm trying to take this approach and just get them out of there, like what is that doing? I'm not giving them any skills. They're probably going to go right back to the situation with family or with boyfriend or girlfriend or friends or whatever's happening to them, right? And if I just try to swoop them up, like yeah, I'm not Batman. You can't just flash a light and I'll just like come down from the sky and grab you and take you. That's just not that's really creepy. And that's just like, shouldn't be how this works, right? It's like, I should be empowering you. So when you need it, you can flip on your little light and you can like armor yourself up in your little superhero suit, right? And do that work. And so that was a really big thing that I had to process, that just because I'm not like, again, saving them, that I am still helping them. And that's actually way more impactful for that person. And I think once I kind of made that mental switch, so much of this became, I won't say easier, it just became like a lot easier for me to process in that way for sure. So instead of just like worrying and worrying and worrying, it's like, well, I gave them all these tools, I gave them all these skills. They know they have me, they have all these other people that we've just kind of blanketed them with support at their discretion. If they want to reach out, they can. And that's been a hugely important reframing process for me.
Very difficult, definitely, not to feel like sometimes, you can't just go in there and swoop them in and rescue them and take them out of the situation, because
Yeah.
you don't want to create that dependency, right? We
Right.
want to kind of help them become a healthy person in regards to making them feel empowered and
Yeah.
making them feel independent and allowing them to kind of gain that experience, because most likely if they were in an abusive relationship, right, or they are growing up in a household where they are being abused, they feel like no, they have no power and control. And so for us, we always say we want to help them gain that, power and
Right.
control again, and make them feel, empowered and make them feel supported. But
Yeah.
yes, it's sometimes so difficult to feel like, you can't just swoop in and rescue them out of a
Mm-hmm.
situation that is horrible, and it just breaks your heart sometimes. But yes, I think we all practice that self control in regards to like, I can't adopt every child or foster every child that is
Yep.
experiencing something so difficult, right? My partner would be like,
Hmm.
again, we're discussing this again.
Hmm.
But
Hmm.
for me, it's like just knowing that the best thing we can do is just support them and empower them and let them know that they deserve to feel respected, and we will be here to support them through that process.
And how disempowering too, if you think someone doesn't trust that you could even help yourself. Like, we may not be saying that,
Yeah.
but in a way, it's kind of like that's maybe the energy I'm putting out there, right? And I can't even imagine feeling that disempowered, that someone, even again with their best intentions, just basically gave me a feeling like, I don't trust that you can figure this out by yourself, so you clearly need saving, right? And so I think that
So true.
especially, right, that was a huge, yeah, a huge changing moment as well.
Yeah, thank you for those visuals, Lisa. When you're talking about sweeping by and scooping people up, I can think about a few youth that I've
Yeah.
worked with, and I'm like, yes, I would love that. But
Same.
so true, so true. Your point you just had of, you know, giving them that power and control back, and us knowing that they have the ability to choose what they know is best for their own situation. They are the expert on
Right.
their own lives.
Right.
So I'm going to circle back to our sex ed conversation just one more time, just to reiterate that
Yay.
every single one of us feels this way. This is my number three. And okay, so when I was in high school, part of my sex ed, this was not actually during the class, this was an assembly that I believe, let's see, I was a freshman at the time. I might have been a sophomore. So it might have been all grades that had to go to this assembly because I was at most a sophomore.
They put you all, the whole school, in the auditorium for the sex ed.
Awkward.
Wow. Wow.
Yes.
Okay. I'm like, I can't
And
wait to hear how this
okay,
goes.
the so I had like health class, but this was a separate, they brought in these presenters,
Oh boy.
this traveling organization that went across the country with this spiel for students about sex ed.
Bless them. Bless their hearts off the bat. Bless them.
Well, hold on.
Oh no.
It was called No Ringy, No Dingy.
Stop. Stop.
Oh my God. I am so
I
sorry,
am
Bree. This sounds so
I am
traumatizing.
dead serious.
Oh, were they like so mad when all the kids couldn't take it seriously? Because I bet they were like, you need to sit down and listen to this. And you're all like, is this a joke right now? Like,
Oh,
really? You have all of us
everyone
and
was
this is the
joking
name?
about it. Yeah.
Oh no.
But this was like a
Oh no.
legit, like they traveled across the country to different high schools presenting this.
Oh no.
No ringy, no dingy. I
Stop.
mean, okay, The one thing they had going for them is that I still, what am I at, 10 years, however many years since my sophomore year, I remember that phrase,
Hey, it is
but
effective. Now I'm gonna
It's
know the
catchy.
phrase
Yeah, it's
too. Yeah,
definitely catchy.
that's one thing we'll give them on that. Like, we're gonna remember this for sure.
so
Hmm.
to kind of bring it back on a little bit of a, well, yeah, more of a serious note on that, I was in a relationship at that time and I was sitting next to the person I was in that relationship with during that assembly. We heard all of that content together, did all of the jokes about it together, and I was sexually assaulted by that person that afternoon. So when we talk about we wish that we had different education about this, that's one of those stories where that really drives that home, and where we really mean that is if that was a presentation by someone who was talking about consent and what consent looks like, what healthy relationships look like,
Yes.
that could have changed that afternoon for me.
Yeah.
Just going the total abstinence based, no ringy, no dingy. And even people were joking about, like, oh, I'll go get her a ring pop and then it's good to go.
Oh God.
Like that. Thank goodness we've come a long way from that. But I think in some areas, I don't think we really have come a long way from that. And we've
No.
all said it, that we've talked to people who said, I wish we had this education. I think we all three agree that we wish we had that education, because I got the same thing. I think the first time I learned what sex was in seventh grade. I remember being completely baffled by it. Like, I had no spoilers before health class. That
Right.
is legitimately where I learned. I feel like nowadays with social media and all that,
Oh
it's
yeah.
more rare that you get a seventh grader who doesn't already know. But that was me. I
Hmm.
was totally caught off guard by it, and it was just all of the anatomical stuff and the
Hmm.
diseases and all of that. It was nothing about this is what you deserve in relationships. This is the emotional component that comes along with engaging in these activities. None of that. And so that's part of why I am so passionate about making sure that youth now get that. And I tell them, like, I wish that I had someone who was giving me this information. Like, even if this seems kind of awkward to talk about,
Yeah.
it's so important for you to at least be exposed to this and to at least have someone starting that conversation, because no ringing, no dingy does not do it.
They made like such a
Does not cut it.
platform. Yeah, they made such a platform for like a million different creative jokes to come out about that name. Like they really set
Yes.
themselves up
Yeah.
for just like, oh, for failure on that one. But I think it is so
Yeah.
interesting because we're not knocking that children should know or like young teens should know anatomical body language, verbiage, or should
Oh, right. That needs
understand,
to be part of it.
right, or should understand like sex and actually like, yeah, diseases and pregnancy and how that works. But like, are we saying that? I mean, at like seventh grade level or early high school level, that we should also have a conversation on like healthy relationships along with that? Like, of course we should, right? We're going to hope and
Mhm.
assume that kids are going to get to a relationship before they get into the sex element, right? So it's kind of just like makes sense that those things are going to kind of come before that, right? They're going to, the relationship and those awkward, stumbly stages of like being attracted and like, initiating hookups or being romantic with your partner, like all of that hopefully is going to come just before the act of sexual intercourse. So should we be teaching them? Like, yes, we should. And I think there's the big scary misconception that you're putting ideas in kids' heads. I don't know. I know these are two vastly different subjects, but I also know a huge misconception. We're talking about suicide prevention, right? The big thing to do is if
Hmm.
someone's feeling that way is to directly ask them, are you thinking about suicide? Are you thinking about harming yourself? And some people hear that, they're like, why would you say that? Like, that's going to put the
Right.
idea in their head. It's like, no, it's not. That idea is already there, but at least now they have somebody that they could talk about it with and hopefully, yeah,
Hmm.
navigate that situation a little differently. And for me, I feel like it's the exact same thing here. You can just deny
Hmm.
it and put it off, but like we're human beings. It's just in our nature at some point these things are going to be of interest and happen. And the more we're just, putting in the no riggy, no dingy people into the seed, right? To kind of like, here, take care of it. Like I just
Hmm.
don't think it's really taking care of it,
No,
but yeah.
it did
Yeah. And
not.
I think with youth having access to the internet now and social media, like
Oh
it's even
yeah.
more important, right? Like it's so important for them to know this important information because they're
Yep.
getting other information from different areas, right? That may not be healthy or appropriate for them.
Yes.
So yeah, that's why like have that conversation. And Bree, thank you so much for sharing. And I just want to say, like, I can definitely see, you being passionate about talking to youth about this. Like I've seen that, and I think it's amazing. And I'm just like connecting all the dots because I think a lot of the things that we are all so passionate about, it's because of some of those personal experiences we've had,
Yeah.
Right.
even though they've been so difficult and challenging. I always say I don't regret anything that I've ever experienced because it has made me who I am now. And I
Yeah.
love who I am now. And I would never be able to say
Hmm.
that, 10 years ago. Like
Yeah.
I would have had a really hard time even saying that I liked the person that I was then. And so I think, it has shaped us and it has made us to, has made us become this like beautiful person. At least I know, I think you're all beautiful inside and out. But with that being
Same.
said, with that being said, the fourth thing that I've learned is the importance of transparency and vulnerability. I think it's something that's crucial in any relationship, right? And when I say this and I say relationship, I don't just mean in an intimate relationship, right? I mean this in your friendships. And the relationships you have with your peers and colleagues at work, right? Or, for youth, the relationships you have with your classmates and again with your friends, also with your family members. And so it's something that you don't often see. And I know that, I've definitely have experienced this and it has been challenging for me to even be vulnerable and transparent in my relationships. But now that I have been practicing this, it has really changed my life, right? Completely as well, where, I feel like I'm a little bit less guarded. I feel like my relationships have improved. The communication piece definitely 100 times more. I used to tend to keep things to myself. So if something bothered me, it wasn't that I didn't want to express it. I was just so afraid of hurting the other person's feelings or making them feel like they did something bad, right? And so I would keep it to myself. But then I would get to that point where I could no longer keep any more secrets and I just like would explode, right? With
Yeah.
like all these different feelings and emotions because it was just too much of me withholding all of this and not feeling like I was able to express myself or, that feeling of also feeling like you're, not being validated or no one is listening to you, but I wasn't speaking up. And so, one thing that I've learned is it's so important to be transparent and vulnerable. And I'm going to give you an example. I had a disagreement with someone, and it was just because, so I had a disagreement with someone and, I thought we hashed it out, was like, okay, it was a disagreement. It's normal to disagree. I'm hoping I can move forward with this person. But then I hear from other people that this person is saying negative things about me. And it just seems like a back and forth thing is going on. And I just don't like that type of environment, or I just don't like feeling that type of tension. I'm just a person that tries to get along with everyone
Yeah.
regardless of who they are. I know that we're all different. So sometimes we are going to not agree, right? But I always say it's okay to agree to disagree. But it got to that point where I felt like when that person was around me, there was so much tension around, and I felt like they felt that tension and I felt that tension. And then people around us were feeling that tension. And I was just so, surprised by the things that I was hearing, where I was like, I thought we were okay. I'm not sure what's going on. And the first few days, I kind of kept it to myself. And then my leadership coach reminded me the importance of being vulnerable, right? And when, a situation arises where it needs your attention, you know, it's so important to respond within, she would always say, within 24 to 48 hours, right? And I did not like that time frame because I needed time to process. Um, but I was like, you know what? Third day going into this, I was like, I need to address this. Like, it's so important that I address this. It's something that's critical. It's something that's affecting my environment. I'm sure it's affecting her environment. Like, I just need to hash it out. And so I talked with this person and I started off by just letting them know, that, I heard some things and I'm not saying that I believe them, but I'm coming from a place of openness because, you know, it really hurt my feelings to hear those things. And I said, I'm not saying they're true or not, but I'm wanting to come to you so that we can have a conversation, because for me, it's so important that we are on the same page. And,
Yeah.
I thought we had kind of an agreement to move forward. And I was telling her, I really want to move forward. Like, I know we don't have to be friends, but I would love to feel that mutual respect and feel like we're comfortable with one another. And she was completely surprised and unaware of why these things were being said. And she's like, I actually didn't feel the tension from you. I felt it from someone else that was always around you. She's like, so if you felt tension from me, it's not because of you. And we had this
Interesting.
full on conversation about a misunderstanding, right? And I had made it into this big thing about how she probably doesn't like me. And, I don't know what's going on. And she's really hurting my feelings. And I just learned so much from that situation. Like, it was so uncomfortable for me to just be very vulnerable and open about how it hurt my feelings and how I thought, we were okay, because I'm not that type of person. And the positive, reaction and response that I got from her taught me so much. Like, and not even that, but someone witnessed, I guess they didn't hear the whole conversation, but witnessed and somewhat heard the conversation and was like, oh my God, like, thank you so much for doing that. Like, I
Mm.
really love how you modeled that. Like that, and I felt like it also changed the dynamic, between other people and that person and me. And so,
Right.
for me, it was like, oh my God, it was such a simple conversation that I was avoiding. And, that's not the only, way that I've been transparent, but it was really something that, taught me that sometimes we make things into something that's bigger when we're not transparent and we're not being vulnerable, right? And sometimes we feel like we're not being heard, or we're not being seen, or we feel like someone is taking us for granted, but we're also not speaking up, right? We're also not communicating. We're also not being raw. We're also not connecting with someone, because really that's how you connect with someone, right? And so, for me, it's like, God, this is something that's so important, not just in my work life, but like, in my personal life and anything that I do, in any relationship that I have. Like, I need to be vulnerable. I need to be transparent. It's not always easy, but it's needed, right? To just have those conversations and be able to discuss something that maybe is bothering you, or something that's triggering you, or
Yeah.
maybe something that you just want someone else to know about you, because sometimes that's what it is. And so for me, I've learned that, I have felt so empowered being vulnerable and raw. And it has taken me even many years to talk about the abuse that I have experienced. This is something new for me. I typically don't discuss it or talk about it. And it's not that I feel ashamed, or that I feel guilty, or that I am like, embarrassed about what has happened to me. It has nothing to do with that. It's more of me feeling uncomfortable with being vulnerable, right? And so, one of my goals with my therapist is to be more vulnerable, because it has really helped me feel empowered, and it has really helped me kind of embrace who I am. And so, to all our listeners, try to be transparent and vulnerable. Whenever you feel comfortable to do so, it can take baby steps, but it can really make a difference, with your relationships with others, and even the relationship that you have with yourself.
Oh, love all of that. And I think we've shared this just in our last episode on boundaries. We talked about how sometimes having those conversations feel so awkward. I don't know why, but we're
Hmm.
terrified. We're so embarrassed by everything. If we feel something about someone, or if we have feelings for somebody, or if we're like feeling like hurt or something, like we're always so quick to like get embarrassed and feel ashamed. And we talked about, yeah, it might feel awkward, and having this like 5 minute conversation of like, hey, can we just talk about, right, like what's going on between you and I? Is there some weird tension? Like, that seems so awkward. Like, I just want to like light on
Yeah.
fire. That's so awkward. But what's more awkward, right, is going through your relationship with all of these awkward moments. We'd much rather you, and you're going to feel probably a lot better, right? And I love that JC is open and vulnerable, practicing your vulnerability here enough, right, to share that and really talk about how like really it was so awkward, but like after we had that conversation, like everything was cleared up. Like, oh, it's like a miscommunication, and now other people feel comfortable, and now other people are feeling empowered that like I did this. So we just really encourage you, yeah, as awkward as things may be, we get it. None of us are perfect. None of us, because we're educated on this stuff walk into conversations and like know exactly what we're doing or don't feel any of those typical normal feelings. We totally do. But we also are just really primed with that understanding that yes, this may be uncomfortable, but is it going to maybe save this entire relationship or years or weeks or whatever amount of time of being uncomfortable? Yeah, and that's totally worth it.
Yeah. And I think, and I just want to highlight really quickly that there's always like that misconception or that label that if you are sensitive or emotional, right, or show any type of sadness, or if you're crying, that that means that you're weak, right, or that you are not strong enough. And it's completely the opposite, right? Like
Mhm.
I really feel like that is a strength to be able to do that, because what is very difficult is to be raw and be yourself and be vulnerable. And so I always say, like, that is the definition of really being strong, right?
Yeah.
But there is kind of like that misconception of, yeah, if you cry, or, women or girls tend to be emotional, or, get, or it's too touchy feeling, and they make it seem like it's not okay. And for men and boys, it's like you're only strong if you don't show emotions, right? Or you don't show your feelings. And so, no, that's the complete opposite. It takes strength to show how you really feel and to be raw and to be vulnerable.
Right. Yes. Hmm.
Yeah.
Yep.
Hmm.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. Just daily.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that's so powerful.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think it's definitely sometimes difficult to detach ourselves from situations like that, right? Because we typically do this so often that we're like so survivor and victim focused and driven, right? And we're like, oh, we're just focusing on them. We're putting our feelings aside. But when you actually get that chance to be alone and kind of process what has happened, it can sometimes, yeah, be very triggering or
Yeah.
just really affect us emotionally. And I definitely had that when I had to accompany someone to get a rape kit done. And I clearly remember being so strong and doing such a great job at being there for them. And I thought it was fine. I clearly thought I was fine. I got home. I remember my partner asking me, like, how's everything? Is everything okay? Like, and I was just like, yeah, yeah, everything's fine. I'm okay. And I sat down on the couch and I just felt like all these feelings rushing into my body. And
Yeah.
I
Hmm.
started feeling anxious and I had to get up and move around and I went to go shower because I felt like, oh God, I don't want to pass this on to my children, who have been waiting for me to be home because I've been gone all day. And I went to shower and I just cried it all out. And I clearly remember telling myself like, it's okay. It's okay. Like you are processing this, it's okay to cry, let it out, and then you'll be okay. And then, yeah, I like got out of the shower, felt better, and continued on. But yes, sometimes it can be very, very triggering.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's such hard work that we do. And my fourth point is kind of touching on that, that people around us recognize how difficult, I'm maybe not to the extent that we do, because it's hard to really know how you're going to react or how it feels to be working in this field until you're actually in it. But my fourth thing that I've taken away from working in this field is every time someone casually brings up, like, hey, what do you do for work? Or where do you work? That kind of thing.
Always fun.
I I talk about this with my coworker. Um, It always goes one of two ways, and I want to see if you guys agree with this.
Okay.
One way that it can go, and I say, "Oh, I work for a domestic violence and sexual assault organization." And one way that it goes is, "Oh, that's awesome. That's such
Yep.
incredible work.
Oh,
Like, good
wow.
for
Yeah.
you. Oh,
Hmm.
that's wow, I could never do that. Like, that's amazing." That's the first way it goes. Second way it goes is, "Oh,
Yep.
Yeah.
I don't know how to respond
oh,
to that.
about
Yeah.
this other thing."
Yeah. Like they're like, I don't know how to tread that water at all. I'm just gonna.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So my coworker Sarah, and I know she listens to our podcast, so hi Sarah.
Hey, Sarah.
Um, we always tell each other like, "Hey, so I told someone where I worked the other day," and we're like, "Which way did it go?" Because
Yep.
it is that black and white. Like they are either, "Oh my gosh, that's so cool and good for you," or
Yep.
"Okay."
Every time. I will validate that. It's every time. Yeah. And it's mostly those people that are like, oh, wow. And sometimes I've had fun things thrown in. They're like, oh, wow, that sounds like a really fun job. And I'm like, it's meaningful, but yeah, but it's always one or two ways. It's either like, oh, wow, or like, ooh, just like slowly backing up and backing away from the conversation. Yeah.
Right. Like you're working with someone who you're filling out like an application for a home loan or something like that, and they have to ask it. And it's either that totally stops them in their tracks, then you have a 5-minute conversation about it, or they're
Yep.
like, okay, and what's your address?
Yep.
Like,
And moving on.
yeah.
That is so funny, Brie, but I think what you said is so accurate. I have definitely experienced that. Absolutely. Like, yes, it's definitely you're doing such a great job, or thank you for what you do.
Right.
You're amazing. Or definitely or just crickets. Like, I experienced that with the
Yes.
Uber driver. I clearly remember him being so chatty. Like, literally, I had no moment of silence in that car ride. And this is in one of our Orange County trainings that we had for one of the conferences.
Oh, yeah.
And I wanted to go to the mall, and it was like, I want to say a little over 20 minutes the whole time, but seriously, not stop talking. And I'm like, okay, cool. I like to talk too. So we're chatting it away. And he literally asked me, what do you do? And I'm like, oh, I'm a human trafficking educator. And then it was like, just completely stopped talking. And I even looked over, like, did you hear me, or are you alive?
He's
Like,
like,
what is
"Oh, I
going on?
heard you. I just don't know how to
Yeah.
respond to that." If anyone
Yeah.
ever needs like a solution, like if you're ever maybe in an Uber or like in a oh, some guy approaches you at the bar and he's like,
Yes.
"Hey, what do you do?" If you ever want the out, I guess we're saying this is actually sometimes a really good out. You could just be like, "Oh, I work with human trafficking." And they'll be like,
It
"See you
works.
Oh,
later,"
it
you
is
know?
It
perfect.
works.
So,
Perfect response at bars because
yep.
if they're trying to like come on to you and you're like, "Oh yeah, I work in sexual assault," they're like, "Okay."
Ooh. I'm
Or you
out of
might
here.
find that gem of a guy that's like, "Oh, wow, that's
True,
really
true.
great," and, like, "I think victim blaming is a problem," and then you could be like, "Oh, wow, hello there," right? Like, I found a good one, right? Not just I'm just kidding, just kidding, but
And
still,
then you'd be like, "If we
um,
have a ringy, then just kidding."
and those people come busting out like, "She remembered! We're effective!" Yeah, oh my god. Oh my gosh.
Oh, sorry, I had to throw that in there.
No, I love it. I love it. This whole
I don't
episode
think
was
we're
us just going off
ever
the rails, yeah.
And Brie, I don't think we'll ever remember that line. I mean, we'll ever forget that line. Okay,
No.
Yep.
that will like now be, yes, in my thoughts at all times when I see a ring, or yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
But with that being said, we're having too much fun here.
This is good.
We are moving. We are moving into our fifth thing that we've learned in this field, and so, um, my fifth thing is just simply it is okay to not be okay, right? And I just think it's so important to highlight that we're all humans and we are all going to experience ups and downs, right? We're
Yeah.
all going to have challenging moments in our life. We are all either a daughter, son, mother, service provider, teenager, survivor, right? And with that being said, we all have some type of responsibility, right? Where we're trying to take care of someone or be there for someone. But you cannot be there for someone or take care of someone without taking care of yourself, right? And it's something that's so critical and that we have talked about, very often, but it's something that we can continue to talk about because we need to hear it as more, as much as possible.
Yeah.
And with that being said, it's okay, like Lisa mentioned, to place those boundaries. It's okay to say no or take a step back so that you're able to take care of yourself, right? If you're noticing that you're burnt out, which happens very often if you are helping others, right? Um, it's so important that you take a step back to take care of yourself and to love yourself and to fill up, what I call your love gas tank, right? Because you can't drive or go anywhere if your tank is empty, right? And so it's so important for you to be able to take care of yourself, to be able to take care of someone else. And so with that being said, I often say that for some reason we sometimes feel guilty, right? When we are taking care of ourselves or we feel selfish, but no, we need to step away from that. If you are feeling that way, that is a perfect sign that you are not taking care of yourself enough, right?
Right.
And it's super healthy for you to take some time to take care of yourself and for you to know that for you to be able to push forward and give your best in anything that you do, you have to feel your best. And so, again, sometimes we'll try to like move forward even though we're burnt out or even though we are drained or even though we are being triggered, right? Or we are experiencing something very challenging. We will try to move forward and act like nothing's going on or try to put on that,
Yep.
work mask or whatever mask you need to put on to keep on going, right? But it eventually always shows up and becomes visible to others. And I have definitely learned that. And I just want to say also that it's important to have a support system that will support you taking care of yourself, right? And I will just say that at Live Violence Free, I feel very lucky. I have never felt so supported in a job ever in my life,
Hmm.
where I have had days where I'm like, I am just having a difficult time with something that I'm experiencing, and or I'm feeling burnt out, and I get nothing but understanding and consent to be like, oh, take care of yourself, take the day off, don't worry. And so it's such a great feeling to have. And it just reminds me that, yes, like I am a priority, I am worthy
Yeah.
of, of time, of love. And we have to remind ourselves of that, who better than yourself, right? So again, it's okay to not be okay. And if you're not okay, take care of yourself, connect with someone that can help you and support you, and take the time because you are worthy.
Love that. What a beautiful message to send. Because I think, yeah, we all really need to just hear that a lot more. It's easy for us to just cast ourselves aside sometimes, especially if you are mothers and we fill a million other roles of being a partner, a sister, a brother, whatever that is. So important that we take that time. So my last piece, my last thing I've learned in this field, and of course, it's not just these five things we've all learned. There's a million. It was challenging for me to kind of narrow my list down. But the fifth thing I'll introduce here today of something I've learned is that there's always a way to discuss a challenging topic with somebody. So whether that be, we kind of talked about this before, maybe you're worried about introducing something at a young age to kids, right? Because you don't think it's developmentally appropriate. There's always a way to
Hmm.
developmentally appropriately have that conversation. Another quick thing too, and we kind of talked about this earlier, and Brianna was like, "Oh, I literally learned sex from sex ed." We were like, "That's so unique because now there's media, and so that doesn't happen." Yeah, that's the truth. There's no longer what we call like a sequence of revealed secrets for kids, right? Because when we were little, we didn't have media,
Mm.
so all of these things like that Santa, like who's listening right now, should I be saying this stuff? I don't think no children should be listening to this conversation. So like you don't know Santa's not real, right? At a certain age, like the Easter bunny and the tooth fairy and like that, like sex exists and what that is, right? Like when we were younger, it was like we were kind of figuring out this sequence of revealed secrets, like, oh, like Santa's not real, oh, the Easter bunny's not real either, and like, oh my gosh, and like that's what adults do, like this is what a relationship is. So we don't have that. We have kids going off and learning it on their own. There's no sequence
Hmm.
when they can just be on their phone and suddenly a pornography ad pops up, right, as they're like on this little
Hmm.
gaming site, or these things start to happen. And so if you're worried about having these conversations with especially children, again, there's always a way to do it. And at this point, you're going to do it way better than some website or some person or some
Yes.
video they're going to be watching is going to teach them that information. At least you then get to control that, right? So definitely keeping that in mind. But even when it comes to just challenging conversations, when somebody just has a completely different mindset than you, we've talked a lot about the importance of body language, of your tone, of just how you open up a non judgmental space for other people to disclose or discuss something with you. And that's so important. And so, yeah, I used to be a lot more, I'm still very strong in my morals and my values and my opinions. I'm still like very much like, I honor my opinions very, very much. But at the same time, especially years down the line, doing a lot of this, working on this a lot, it's really given me a chance to just kind of like what Bree said before, kind of meeting people where they're at, even if it's mentally, right? Even if it's like the way I view the world, the way I see these issues. And so it was really a big moment for me to start really kind of like training in that and how to have these conversations and why it's so important to respond a certain way. And it's not even about changing someone's mind, but it's just the opportunity that like if someone really vocalize something that is just like way outside of my values, right? And I really feel like I could have that conversation, right? Like maybe yes, like I would love to almost empower you with this other piece of information as well, right? So you just at least both know both sides. There's a very strong possibility. I think, especially now culturally, we're very caught up in like, you think this way, I think that way. That's just it. We can't talk. We can't agree. And it's very sad to me because, again, we don't have to change each other's minds, but can we literally just meet in the middle and communicate in a way that's not like, I'm right, you're wrong, or like you're stupid and I'm smart? Yeah, there's a million ways we can do that. And it's important to look into that. And so I think that's a big one to take away. And if anyone's having challenges with that, I know we've had plenty of episodes talking about how to talk to survivors and just being appropriate in those ways. A lot of that carries over for just having difficult conversations. So I really encourage you to go back and listen into those if you have not yet.
All right, rounding us out, my fifth one, and it's pretty simple. Take the PTO, the paid time off, the vacation days, the sick days, take them. My little story with this is I came to this job with my most previous job being waitressing. And so obviously no benefit package there, no paid days off there.
No
When I
time off.
interviewed with our agency, it wasn't even a question on my mind. I wasn't like, normally when you interview, that's something you like even negotiate is like the benefits package, you know?
Right,
It
right.
wasn't until I started getting the paperwork for us to like fill out stuff to get health insurance and all of that. I was like, oh, I get health insurance? Like, that's cool. Oh,
I
wait,
get
what's on
time
my
off.
paycheck? Like, what is this? What is these hours on my paycheck? What do those do?
We have vacations here. What does that look like? What's a
It was such a
vacation? Yeah.
foreign thing, and if you're in a job, in a position where you can take that time, take it. It is there for you to rest and recharge, and I know whenever I have some days where, I'm taking a day off because maybe I had something in the morning and I'm like, you know what, I'm going to take the rest of the day off. Like, give your agency the time ahead of time and do all of the protocol that you need to do for that.
Yeah.
However, take the time. It is there for you. Don't let it just like get to the max and then you're like, oh, I have to come up with an excuse, like make sure you're taking care of yourself along this journey in whatever you do.
Yes.
Take the time.
Yes.
Absolutely. Yes, I love that. With that being said, I feel like we had such a great conversation. We talked about vulnerability, we talked about boundaries, we talked about being resilient, we talked about sex ed, we talked about so much.
We did.
But we
Yeah.
hope yeah, we hope that our learned experiences will make a difference or just shed a new light for you. And with that being said, it's so important to know that having conversations like that are so meaningful. It can really make such a big difference, and that's why we say one conversation can change a life. And so, with that being said, our amazing Lisa will be leading our meditation.
Awesome. So, what I want to do today, this is not going to be very long, but especially thinking about some of these things that we just learned and shared, right? A lot of them are boundaries and being vulnerable. So, what I want to do today is a little meditation where we focus on an element that we think we need, right? So, maybe that could be a level of calm. Maybe it's patience. Maybe I need more boundaries. Maybe I need to be more vulnerable. So, I want our listeners and my other co hosts who are going to be meditating to just start finding yourself to your comfortable little seated position. But at the same time, I want you to start thinking about what your word is. Maybe it's just, yeah, kindness to myself. Maybe it's calmness. And as we take our nice deep breath in through our nose, really visualize that word. Big exhale. Gently close your eyes. Take a deep breath in and out. Keep taking nice slow breaths in and out. While you're taking these breaths, I want you to visualize that word in your mind. Whatever your word is, whatever you're inviting yourself to bring more to your day, whether it's calm, whether it's vulnerability. With every inhale and exhale, imagine that word growing larger. With every inhale, imagine yourself kind of drinking in from this word. With every exhale, imagine yourself really sending your intention out towards it. So you're breathing in and embodying. You're exhaling your intentions out to the universe. If you find your mind getting distracted, you can feel free to repeat this word silently to yourself with every inhale, every exhale. On your next inhale, grow that word even larger in your mind. And exhale. Again, grow it even larger on your exhale. Breathe in, grow that word as large as you can. And on this exhale, I want you to blow it away like a dandelion. Take a deep breath in and hold it. And exhale. One more, the biggest breath you can. Really fill your lungs and hold. And exhale. And slowly go back to your normal breathing. Start to wiggle around in your seat a little bit, waking your body up. You can wiggle your fingers and toes, roll your wrists and ankles. Make any adjustments you need to. And for the rest of the day, if you ever feel like maybe I need a little bit more of that calm, or I'm not being as open as I said I would in my intentions, I want you to kind of breathe back into it, right? And just kind of do that little visualization. Imagine if you're like, wait, I just need more patience. I'm going to take a deep breath in, growing that word in my mind, and I'm just going to send it out there, right? So I hope, especially after kind of, again, talking about some things we needed, right, or we realized, or that we found ultimately so important. Hopefully you took some time during that meditation and maybe, focused on maybe something we took out of this, or something that you recognized, right, that maybe you need more of in your life, or something that just better serves you, to kind of have that be more of a upfront thought in your mind. So, yeah, I really hope that some of our listeners maybe are walking away feeling a little more empowered after that meditation.
Yes, thank you for that, Lisa. And thank you, everyone, for joining us for this conversation. We look forward to having you back for our next conversation. Don't forget to take PTO.
Yes.
Yes.